Okay, Greg.
All right. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining today to kind of kick off our Chicago chapter. I'll also throw my video on too. But first of maybe 4 times a year, we'll get together and kind of an open forum. We're gonna try out a couple of different things from like presentations or roundtables and stuff like that. And we'll hopefully have some feedback from you guys to figure out what our next meeting will focus around and what everyone wants to get out of this. But the goal here is just to kind of come together, and I know it's at Chicago and we've got some folks not in Chicago. By the way, if you can drop in the chat where you're calling in from to get a sense of where everyone's coming from. But we can use this as our own time to talk about UiPath with folks from UiPath and sort of all over the different industries and different regions to kind of better all of our skills and abilities and knowledge and provide feedback and all sorts of things like that. So the 4 of us hosting this Chicago chapter along with me are Nishant, Diana, and KJ. Diana's on the call. I don't know if KJ or Nishant are able to make it today, but regardless, I'm sure you'll see them the next go around, unless they might jump in midway through the call. And we had a little last second change, I believe. Is that right, Diana, for the...
No, we have our original speaker. We're good.
Okay, cool. So I'll just give you a quick background about me for those that don't know me. My name is Greg Jacobson. I am an intelligent automation manager at Protiviti. I've been using UiPath for 4 years now. Wish it was longer because I used to work in accounting and had a lot of clicking and typing that I wish I had access to UiPath for. But love the software. I was at the Forward convention in Las Vegas last October. I'll be there again in September, so always a good time to go to that. Was recently granted the UiPath Most Valuable Professional Award, so super excited about that too. Diana, do you want to give a quick background about yourself?
Sure. So I am the North America community manager, which includes Canada, Latin America, and the US. We have 23 chapters in all, and we're excited to kick off the Chicago chapter today. So welcome everybody. This, as Greg mentioned, is really a forum to participate. Let us know what topics you're interested in, have time to network and get to know each other, and just build the community up in Chicago, which is one of our strategic areas. So we're really excited that you all joined today. And with that, why don't we see, Mick, are you there?
I am here. Sorry, I was fumbling around on my mute.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead and give a quick introduction and let us know about the topic? Something that I'm excited about for sure, because test automation is one of the newer features that I really haven't had a lot of experience with. So I think it's going to be super educational for me. So take it away, Mick.
Yeah, thank you guys. So I am Mick Taylor. I am a principal sales engineer with UiPath. I've been with UiPath for about 4 years now. Worked in a variety of roles. I've worked as just a pre-sales engineer, just in general, but I really grew to love the test suite. So that's why I'm here to present to you guys today some different topics surrounding test suite. And we'll kind of take a deep dive into why we use test suite and what it all entails. So we'll take a look at some demos. We'll do a full deep dive on it. So my demos are very interactive. I love to have people talk during them. Go into different topics. So if you guys have any questions or you have any comments, just interrupt me. I have no problems with you going off mute and asking a question. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go through some slides. I'm going to try to go through them quick because I hate slides and I would rather just talk about the product and give you guys a live demo. So let me get my screen sharing. Give me 1 second. All right, so let's get started. So is there anybody here that has used Test Suite today? And if you don't want to speak up, you can put in the chat if you have or have not. And while you guys are putting those answers in, Test Suite came about 2 years ago. We had some customers that were coming to us and they were saying, hey, we just started using your product to create application tests, meaning that they wanted to be able to test their applications out because they love using UiPath Studio, but there wasn't really a formalized way of doing it. So they were using spreadsheets to track whether things have worked, and it was really informal. So what we did is we came back to the customer with a formalized approach with a full platform that allows us to test your systems out. So let's jump in. So why is scaling automation so difficult? What we've seen in the past is oftentimes folks have a really easy time at the start of creating their automations, and oftentimes things start to become more and more complex and they hit this inflection point where either their automations might have changes, this inflection point right here, and they start losing some of the value that they would like to see. So to account for this, what we have seen is that if you look at why these applications are not work, or why your automations are failing, it kind of boils down to a few things. Whether it's environment issues, applications issues, when there's changes that are happening frequently, it results in higher maintenance costs, which reduces the ROI that you get out of your automations. So what we've done is we've created a platform that allows for your development folks, your IT operations, and your business folks to all be using the same tool all together, and really to create automations and quality gates that propagate between the different business units. So as we said, all the folks using the same infrastructure, the same automations, and they're able to share those skills between the different folks using it. So we're going to skip over this one. Recently, UiPath was named as a leader in the testing platform. So UiPath joined the testing space just 2 years ago, and all of the different companies that you've seen on the right, they've been in this space for years and years. And I think it just says a lot about our platform that we have become a leader, and we've been recognized as a leader not only on the IDC MarketScape but also in the Gartner testing report. So it's really being recognized across the industry that UiPath is really well suited for your testing needs, as well for application testing, but also for RPA testing. All right. So when we talk about the test suite, what are the components? So the components that we're looking at are really a lot of the tools that you know and love today. So right here in the center, these are our core products. So you got Studio. This is where you're going to build your automations, where you build your test cases. Then Orchestrator, which whenever you're finished building your automations out, Orchestrator hosts all of those automations and is your command center. And in the testing focus, it allows us to create test sets, to create all of your data-driven tests, things like that. And then in terms of robots, really there's just a small difference. UiPath robots also have a type of test robots. And these test robots are what allow us to generate our assertions. So instead of accomplishing a business outcome, so for instance, you want to be able to read some data from one system and enter it into another. That's accomplishing a business outcome. But in testing, what you're focusing on is that your expected values meet your actual values. So that the test robots allow you to return those assertions. So that's the core three. But then what we've done is we have actually created a bolt-on product. So the test manager app and then the test manager hub right here. These are essentially, more or less the same thing. But the reason that we differentiate these is because the app is a web, a web interface. So it's, if you guys are on-prem customers, you deploy it on an IIS server and you connect it to a SQL database. It can be the same orchestrator database. Or if you're in the cloud, you just activate the test manager component on your UiPath platform, and then it's available for you to use. Now, why we have these differentiated is because we built out these connectors. These connectors are really great for you guys because if you are already using something like Atlassian Jira or Azure DevOps or any of these other tools that are over here, you can create a connection into the test manager application. And this is important because when you're in a development cycle, I'm going to kind of do some additional drawings to draw out kind of a story of how this would all fit together. But imagine you are working on an automation in Studio or even a test case. What you'll do is we're going to draw a box right here. This is our Git repository. So this is where what controls all of our code. So we take that code, we check it into Git. Now, before that happened, what we had done is we were working in Jira and we created a requirement. So let's just draw our queue here for requirement. And then we wrote some test case documentation. So this is all documentation around it. So for instance, the requirement might be that I need to be able to log into a banking system. Now the test case would say that I can log in successfully, that I can log in, that I can fail to log in, maybe that we check some characters. So they would have multiple test cases attached to that requirement. And what we do is in Jira or in Studio, we connect that back to the test case in Jira. Now when we check in our code into Studio, what's going to happen is you're going to have that connected to, say, an Azure DevOps pipeline. So this pipeline right here is going to recognize that. It's going to send a message to Orchestrator saying, hey, there's some new code in. We need to run some tests. So then Orchestrator is going to send a message to the robot to run. The robot will return the results to Orchestrator. And then the results will then be shown on this test case that you wrote. So immediately, whenever you check in that code, it's going to kick off that pipeline to get your results back to Atlassian Jira. And this is important because instead of manually manually documenting out what happened on those test cases. So sometimes we might automate our tests and then we'll manually go and look at the output and then manually record the results in Jira or a spreadsheet or something like that. Instead, what we have is automated deployment, automated run of our tests, and then automated reporting of those test results. Now, your developers will love this because then they know immediately what happened. They'll be able to see screenshots, log files, etc. Now, is there anybody here who has used any testing tools in the past? Okay, so it looks like we've got
Hey,
Lauren.
Mick, this is Nishant. Um yeah, I used to use a lot of different tools in the past, like QTP, Quick Test Professional, which was with HP.
Hmm.
Also, there is Cucumber. There is .NET based tool, and other aspects of the thing. But
Okay.
what I really like about the test suite here is it's a low code, right?
Yep.
And the other ones were pretty heavily coded. So uh, that's a differentiation I'm seeing here.
Yeah. So when you say you like that low code in comparison to those other products, were those really heavily coded? You might have to write scripts.
That's right. So like in QTP, we used to use VB script, right? There was Selenium, which used like .NET as the base, right? So these are all developer tools with heavy amount of coding, right?
Yes,
Uh, yeah, unlike I think UiPath had lot more click and this with low code to almost no code at points.
for sure. So yeah, that's one of the problems that we saw a lot was, we got folks that are using, say, Selenium or something like that, and they found that you have to have really a developer working on the test cases to see any value on it. And then if that developer leaves, or that QA developer leaves, then oftentimes it's hard to manage any of those tests. And that's where Studio comes in, where you guys know how easy it is to build out test cases or to build out automations. You can then teach your manual testers to be able to use a recorder to edit a few variables and then be able to manage creating those test cases much easier.
That's a great point, Mick. I mean, I know the maintenance and then transition of test cases were always very challenging.
Yep, yep, for sure. So what we'll do next is we're gonna walk through a few videos, and we'll see some robots actually running test cases and how it functions. Now, I didn't get to the part where we talk a little bit about application tests versus RPA tests. So I do want to mention that before we get started on that. And the differentiation there is an application test is testing functionality outside of UiPath. So uh, if we'll take our banking example, if we want to be able to test a banking system that it has some expected behavior, then we'll use an application test. Now, for you guys, if you guys are already building RPA workflows, then we have RPA tests, and these essentially serve as unit tests. So if you guys have worked in any other programming uh, jobs in the past or used different programming languages, say for instance Java or Python or .NET, there's always unit testing that's expected to be done by your developers, and RPA is no different. We expect our developers to write unit tests that provide coverage of our workflows. So if we want to be able to see how many different branches we've hit, we can see that if we've hit only 60% of our branch coverage with our unit tests, we need to step up our unit testing a bit more so that we can have confidence in our workflows. This gives us much lower downtime like we saw in that earlier slide. We have a lot of features on that. I'm not sure we'll have time to get into it, but we'll see what we have time for. Things such as mocking, where you say you need to hit an API, but you don't want the RPA workflow to actually execute that. You can mock it out so that you always use some value that you would expect to return. So before we get started on our live demo, what questions do we have from the group so far?
Hi, Mick. This is Priya. And I would like to know more around, like, the difference that you just talked about, like in terms of the unit testing versus the integration testing. Let's say, like, once you put together like all the pieces, you have all the workflows, and then you test the entire process all together. You want to know like if it works, right? And how does it like entangle with, like, if I were to give like functional test cases to my users, so in terms of like a UAT, how would that work?
Great question. So kind of you want to know the difference between more differences between AP or RPA testing and application testing, and how this kind of fits into the UAT landscape of your maybe your business owners need to do some tests. How can they utilize Test Suite for that?
Yes, and also, like, is there a way to capture, the UAT results? Like, let's say within the test manager inside the orchestrator, is there a way to see that?
Yep, that's a great question. So we'll get to that on the live demonstration. Hold that question, and then if I don't answer it, let's circle back to it towards the end. Is that okay?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. So how about we get started on this? And where this video comes from is one of our customers came to us with a use case a couple years ago. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to integrate Salesforce into SAP just for a regular RPA workflow. So taking data that is entered into Salesforce and then integrated into SAP. So we worked with a partner to build out that automation, and it worked great. They loved it. It's really easy to move that data between the two systems, and it keeps it synced up. And then what they said is, we have some of these integrations between our different SAP systems as well as a AS400 green screen application. So these integrations, the ones between SAP and the green screen, are not done via UiPath. They kind of use a back-end integration, and this allows us to this allows them to view data between SAP and that green screen application. What they said is occasionally there are issues between those systems. And what we would like to do is be able to test that when we enter in data into Salesforce, that it remains consistent across the SAP systems as well as into the AS400 system. So we reused some components that we built between Salesforce and SAP Fiori, and then we were able to add on a few test cases in the various different systems. And this created a very low development time so that we could reuse those components for these test cases. So what I'm going to do is we're just going to make this a little bit faster so we'll get through this. Let me mute it. It's going to just going to jump forward into Test Manager. So we're going to first look at Test Manager. This is the web app that you have added on for Test Suite. It'll come up in just a sec. So here is Test Manager, and we can see here that we've got a test set here that we want to execute. It's going to execute our test cases for an end-to-end test. So when we click execute, it's going to.
Hey Mick, you might still be sharing the presentation.
Yeah. So I'm going to just go back to this slide so you guys can see kind of the flow, and sorry about leaving the share up there. So this is kind of the flow. So Salesforce and SAP, and doing SAP and then into AS400. So we click execute. It's going to start up our workflow. Then it is going to start the execution. Our robot's going to fire off. Salesforce is going to pop up. It's going to log into that Salesforce application. It's now going to navigate to an account, create an opportunity for us. It's going to enter in these fields, and this code was reused from an RPA workflow that we used. And then we're going to head into this Salesforce activity after it does an assertion to make sure that it says closed in one right there. So after it has verified that it is closed in one, it's going to move on to this S/4HANA system. It's going to open up a sales order. And then it's going to continue navigating through that. It's going to enter in a few fields here. Some of the fields will be pre-populated from that robot executing. It's going to enter in these fields here for us. And while it's doing this, it has no problems with SAP. If you guys use SAP, you already know that it has no problems finding those fields, even tables. We've built in activities to handle tables much easier than any other platform could. It's going to log into our second SAP system. It's going to do some verification statements here. And then it's going to finally log into the AS400 green screen application. It's going to do a final verification here and then report the results back to Test Manager. So we're going to take a look at Test Manager now. We can see that the result failed. We'll want to go see why that failed. So we can see here we got a few different runs that we've done. Go and view this execution log for the last time we ran it. We'll see that 3 of our test cases passed and 2 of them failed. Now it's nice to be able to see that, we got verification passed here, but really what we want to see is we're going to want to go look at why the ones failed. So instead of, just being able to look at a log message, like a lot of testing tools provide, they'll give you, where this test case failed. We'll be able to go and look at the screenshot. This tells us exactly which step that test case failed and give us a good idea for our developers and what they need to go and modify in the system to make sure that the test case will pass. Now, instead of sending a Slack or a Teams message to your developer, what you can do is click on Tasks, create defect, and then that defect is ready to be assigned to that developer. So just click on the defect and then be able to view the details of it. And what questions do we have on that demonstration?
So I got a quick question for you, Mick.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're, building a new bot that could be a good case to use the, test automation suite that you don't currently have. You're investigating it, but you're not sure yet. Do you kind of build with the architecture, so it'll be quick to implement in Test Suite, or is it not too difficult to kind of build a bot normally and then add in the Test Suite functionality once you're fully set on it and plan on using it, and just like kind of go in and add those quick couple of cases? Like, do you have to go into the project with Test Suite in mind, like when you're designing the architecture?
No, you do not need to have a plan to start. None of our customers would be using Test Suite if that was the case, I would say. Um, when it comes to Test Suite, say for RPA workflows, you want to be able to test out your RPA workflows. Then the what's in what you'll have to do is you'll just have to add it in add in some activities. So we're gonna how about while we're talking about that, we're gonna jump over into how we create test cases for existing workflows. So one of the things that I want to mention, and we're going to take a little bit more of a deeper dive look at this, but I recommend that everybody here start looking into using the modern design experience if you haven't already. The reason that we want to do that is because we can create descriptors for our applications. So I know that a lot of people here have probably had this scenario where they're building an automation and maybe one of the text boxes changes, drastically changes, and then you have to go and modify that text box in 7 different places. So what we've done is we've created a way that allows you to um, change all of the references of, say, that text box, but B, give you fallbacks on your selectors. So the approach that we have is fuzzy selectors, and image selectors, as well as anchors tied to it. And this creates a much more robust selector for you to use for your automations. Let me jump forward just a little bit here. So the first thing that we're going to look at is this RPA workflow that we've created. This workflow that we're looking at has some built-in sequences, but what we want to do is we're going to extract this workflow out so that it can be a reusable component that we can test at a unit level. So here we're going to create a new workflow from this one. We're going to call it a component. And now that workflow and all of its variables have been extracted. This is important for, if you want to test things at lower levels to extract components out rather than just have one giant file. And we've got a few other components here that we also want to test out. We want to test out sending email, creating loans, creating a loan with a flat file. So here is our create loan in the bank portal. Now, if we want to, we can create an object repository for this. So if we click add to object repository, it will automatically recognize if you've already created an object for it. So say you previously went in on one of your other workflows and you said, I've got this text box here and I want to create a reusable component for it. Now, if you go and try to do it again, UiPath Studio is smart enough to say, hey, I've seen this before. Let's just tie it back to the object that you created previously. So we're going to just click reuse here instead of create new. And then we'll go and be able to view that selector if we were to indicate or edit that target. Now, a lot of times what folks do is they go into this area over here where this recorder is, and they just go capture their entire application. So they'll just click record, start clicking around on the different applications and just record all their selectors, and then they'll build their application from there. Our next thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at some of our test cases that we've created already. So here's that is an end-to-end test, and that end-to-end test is going to test out the entire main workflow. So when we want to create a new test, I think your question was, how do we start that out? Essentially, it's just say you want to do your entire, RE framework test case. Then you would right-click your main workflow. You would click create test case, and then it would create a template for you to be able to create that workflow. And that template is in a given when then form. It's essentially say, given I have some data or given I log into a system, when I invoke this workflow, then I expect to see some functionality. So this creates, a formalized way of creating your test case. This is our framework for testing. Is that given, when, then. So here's one that we've already created. It shows, given I've got some assigned test data, it's going to provide the file names, the folder path, then we're going to invoke the main workflow. And then we could even, if we wanted, we could use synthetic test data creation. So say you want to generate a given name and a last name at the start of each test run, and it'll create a new one, or even an address, or pick from a list of values, and then you'll be able to use that at runtime. So from here, we're going to invoke this workflow. We're going to provide it this file path for our test case. We're going to tell it then to go in and find an email, and then or send an email, and then finally finish up by finding that email and verifying that that email was sent out. So that's our simple test case that we've created, and we're going to have it go through this workflow, and then we'll be able to see the results from it after it's run. Let's jump through a little bit right here. So when we run that test case, it's going to show us, what our coverage for this workflow was. So we ran this test case, and now we'll see that, we hit 83% of that workflow. Now, if we hit this button right here and click covered activities and uncovered, and it'll give you a visual representation of what you've covered on this workflow. This is useful for your developers. Then they can instantly look at it, say, hey, I've hit 83, I want to hit 100%. So I need to cover this send email for invalid file. But what if you don't actually want to perform that action for that, send email for invalid file? What we can do is we can use what's called a mock. So we're going to create a test case, and we're going to use a mock. And this is where you have it, so it's not going to do some activity. So see this on here, it says check if file exists. Now instead, we just want to mock to check if that file exists, so that we don't have to deal with that. Whenever we surround something with a mock, it gives you that format of what is actually in the RPA workflow. Let's kind of go right back to that. We'll see the mock once we create it on this log message. So we surround with mock. And then this is what would happen actually on the workflow. And then this is what happens in our test. So it's a bit of an advanced topic, but it's extremely useful for our developers. We'll go and take a look at the mock that we use, so that it doesn't actually perform that false. So we're just going to tell it, it's always going to be true. It's not going to actually search to see if the file exists. So here's another test that we created for verifying, if things have incorrect paths, then it's going to perform a different behavior to get our coverage up. So if we want, we can also create a test case at a unit level for this send email workflow. And then we could tell it, import the arguments. And then here is, after we've actually built out this workflow for our RPA tests. So let's just jump ahead a little bit further. We're going to also take a look now here at some of our different selectors. So we've created, these different loan application workflows. This is a verify control app state, or verify control attribute. What we're doing is we're telling it we want to verify something. This is going to tell us whether our test case passes or fails. We're going to check to see some behavior. So we dragged in a check app state, and then we're going to verify that it meets our expected value on the right. So we're checking to see whether there's, the email address field there, and then we're checking to see that it's true. If we want, what we can do is we can link all of these back now to Test Manager. Either we could either create them, or we could we could tie them back to existing ones that maybe we created in Azure DevOps or in Jira. So once we click open test on these are ones that we already created previously. We can go and view, what it's tied to. This one's been automated already, so we tied it back to it. We can publish those test cases, and once we publish them, then the results are going to make their way back to Test Manager anytime we run those. Now we'll go back over to Test Manager. We can see, we've got some various tests. Now, oftentimes you want to be able to test in different ways. So, for instance, a full regression test would be, a bunch of tests that we want to test out maybe once a week. Insanity tests, maybe you just want to, focus on the breadth rather than, the depth of all of your tests. And then there's also smoke tests. These are just, checking to see maybe that your systems are up, that, your RPA workflows will run, when you have them scheduled. So you might run those smoke tests, periodically through the day. It might take a minute to run them all, and then you'll have all of those execute. So we're going to go and assign a few test cases. We've got these test cases are all assigned. So we created those in Studio, and we're going to assign them back to a full test set. And then we'll be able to view all of the results for all of those tests. We can see how long it ran. We can view the results. We can go and view the screenshots, all hosted in one place. Now, these results are also shown in Orchestrator, so you can go to your Orchestrator and view the execution results as well. See if there was anything else that I wanted to show here. So say something does fail. So for instance, one of these failed, and we just need to, we can see that, there's no UI element found for it. Essentially, your selector is not being found. So we just need to go and indicate the target on the screen, tell it, add it to an object repository so that we can make changes across the application. So we'll click finish there, and then we'll update it, and then our test cases will pass. All right, so that is RPA testing. Greg, does that answer your question? Kind of how do we create test cases for, an existing RPA workflow that we have?
Yeah, definitely. So if you have like a separate project already built and it's like a test, the project type is like a test case type of project, like you have to make a new project, right? That's of that type.
So there's two, as we said, there's RPA testing where you're testing out an RPA workflow, and then there's also your application tests. So if you're doing application tests, then you'll create a test automation project here.
Right. Okay.
Right. So, but if you're creating, a enterprise level RPA workflow, maybe a long running workflow, then you'll use, say, the RE framework, and then you'll create your workflows within that RE framework.
Gotcha. Okay. Very cool. Yeah, I like it.
Awesome. Now, if there's anybody that has in the past, say, used Selenium, then one thing that we do offer is the ability to bring in your Selenium test scripts into UiPath. So for instance, here's a Selenium script that we wrote. It's very simple. It goes into a Python web page, and then it's going to test that we find some element on that website. Okay. So here, what we do is we just tell it to load in this Selenium jar, invoke the method within that Selenium script, and then get the results back. So this is useful for folks that have already, started creating application tests with Selenium, but don't want to lose all that progress that they've made. So they'll just pull in all these workflows into their UiPath Studio test cases, and then UiPath robots will then execute the Selenium scripts for them and return the results back to Test Manager, Orchestrator, and possibly even Jira or Azure DevOps if you've configured that as well. So let's run this test case. It's then going to execute that jar file. It's going to pull up the Python web page, ensure that it finds some element on the screen, and then it verifies and shows a pass message. You could even do this with Selenium or with Python scripts. So if you use Python instead, then you can use this as well. So let's finish up there on that part. So any questions about Selenium before I move on to the next question about test data? Nope. All right, let's move on. Let's move over to this workflow that I got here, and we'll take a look at how we can do test data. So generally, the challenge that a lot of our customers have is that they, running one test once, it's pretty good. It helps you have a little bit of confidence in your workflows. But what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to run these tests many, many times to have a lot of confidence in your workflows. So what we've done is we've created what's called data-driven test cases. Now, when we go and create a data-driven test, I'm just going to create a new one. So we're going to create a test case, and then we'll just call this one application test data-driven. And then we want to be able to include some test data in this. So let's go and click next. We'll click a source. Now we could use a file, we could use existing data, even data service. So data service is tied to Orchestrator. You create a JSON, a JSON schema, and then you can upload, data there to run at runtime. Or you can do a file, just pull in a CSV. We're just going to use existing data. This one is, some loan quotes, test data that we previously brought in from a spreadsheet. Whenever I click create, what it automatically does then for me, which is really nifty. I've actually seen people use this just for their for argument creation. If you say have a bunch of arguments that you need to create, then you could just use this and copy over those arguments. But it takes the header file, the header row of the CSV, and then it creates a bunch of arguments here for you to use, and then the default values. Now, if I want to run this test case, all I need to do is click Run File with Data Variations, and then we've got all of our data here. Now, this could be 100,000 rows of data, and we could have it execute on those different data points. So if I click Run, then now it's going to execute my test case. So we'll just watch it run through one or two of these executions. It's going to enter in all these fields and do a verification statement. It's going to run a second time now, a second set of data. And then we finish up. So we can see here's our execution results. We could also go to Test Explorer and then view the execution results here for those two different data points. So there's also some additional question on this. So you want to hit it with a high data load and variability. So I think that kind of covers that here. You could give it thousands of rows of data, and you could change it up using the data service. And say you want it to be in the test environment. If the workflow does more than read, you'll have an issue. Yeah.
It wasn't a question.
Okay.
Sorry. This is
Cool.
Lauren Lang. It was more I was commenting as you were going on and kind of maybe for the benefit of people who haven't used the testing before. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the test generated data, if you're doing a read only workflow, cool. But if not, needs to be in the test environment, or
Yeah.
sometimes have the experience where it's low enough a risk of process and data that you can do a rollback. But yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, no, and that more kind of comes down to test methodology, and
yeah,
there's tons of resources, you can read about that. But we offer the tools for being able to do that. Whether you wanted to, create workflows to allow you to, set environment variables, things like that. Now I want to show one last demo. So we're going to just take a look at Azure DevOps. And we'll do this one real quick before we wrap up. But we're going to take a look at, uh, this is going to be kind of an end-to-end demonstration, that I was talking about on that PowerPoint. It's a very much more mature model of doing things using pipelines, using Jira, but it's really actually pretty easy to set up. So I've got a test here for logging in. I want to be able to test out this workflow. So here I've created this application test. Now I can right click, commit. I'm going to check it into my Git repository. So I'm going to check in that code. Now here's my Git repository, and you saw that very quickly there. It flashed up, that we just checked in some code 12 seconds ago. Now our Azure DevOps pipeline has recognized that. It's going to find an agent to work on. Now we've provided you with some activities to be able to utilize within Azure DevOps. So within these pipelines, we can do a pack, test, deploy. There's a few others that we've released since creating this video. But essentially this pack will pack up your NuGet package. The second one will test out the workflow. And then the third one will deploy onto Orchestrator. So we're going to go back to our pipeline and check to see how that run is going. Once it finds an agent to work on, so it's just going to find a computer to work through. So what we found was this test case actually failed. So we can see 75% passed. We had 25% that did not pass. So let's go and take a look at what happened in there. So we can go into Jira, and then we can view that test execution. So here we saw, the screenshot. We saw that the result was false, and that there's some issues there on our workflow. So we need to go and make a fix. Here's our screenshot. Saw that in Jira. We could also log into Orchestrator, get some additional details on the full log messages there. So we now know that we need to change that value from false to true. And we check in our code once more. Once we check in that code, Azure DevOps is going to run once again. It's going to pack, it's going to test. So it finishes up all the tests, it's going to return the results back, and then we'll see a deploy there. So it deployed our code then onto Orchestrator, fully automated, got our results back to Jira. This is much easier than having to manage, through spreadsheets, clicking publish, making sure that your developers are actually testing the code out. So I know we only have 2 minutes left. I wanted to check back with Priya. Did all of this answer your questions that you had?
Yeah, Mick, thank you so much, like for showing me that difference with the unit testing and the integration testing. Although you did like trigger me like another question altogether. Sorry, my baby's like,
Oh, no worries.
he also wants to be a part of this conversation.
So I think that the other question was about UAT. Now, the way that I would see UAT working is you would provide the bot to the business folks that are using, that would then be able to just run the workflow. They could watch it, and then the results would then propagate back to Jira. And then maybe you could even add a business approval in pipelines or in Jira to approve, the new code.
Okay, so I mean, just for my clarity here, like if I were to deploy this process, I mean, this process using the pipeline gets approved and like goes to the non-production environment, let's say like the test environment, And do we need to replicate these test cases in the test manager for that specific robot, or like can we just reuse the same test cases there?
You'll use the same test cases, but typically most people just use one test manager environment. So maybe that's it. Maybe in dev, there's no test manager. They just run the tests and then verify, that they run correctly. And then once it gets to the test environment, that's where, the results matter to you guys.
Okay. And I truly love the part where you showed us about the coverage. I mean, that truly is like an amazing feature, especially as a solution architect. If I'm doing like code reviews, it actually helps me to understand like if my developers were able to like truly, like test it, like whether they were able to do the unit testing.
Yep.
So that gives the real metrics. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that really helps you guys, when reporting back to your higher ups, they ask, are you testing your code? And then you ask your developers, are you testing your code? And they're like, yeah, I tested it out. And this
Yeah.
really proves that.
I have like one last question, if you don't mind.
Yep.
So from the test manager on the orchestrator where you showed us, is that segregated by the modern folders?
No, we create individual projects within Test Manager.
Okay, so we can separate that per automation.
Yep, you could do it per automation, per business group, whatever kind of organization makes most sense for you.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
No.
You did a great job, Mick. Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
Mick, thank you so much for the presentation today.
Yeah, no problem. All right, well, I got to run for another call, but thanks everyone for joining.
Yes, thanks so much, Mick. We appreciate it. I also have to drop, and everyone stay tuned for an update on our next session, probably in September would be my guess.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.